Welcome to Hay Bellers and Holy Rollers. I'm your host, Jeremy Farley, and today I've got a guest who has worn boots in cow pastures as well as having worn shoes on the United States Senate floor. He's a cowboy in Nevada, a law clerk in Virginia, a governor, a senator, and a straight-shooting conservative voice who never forgot where he came from. Not to mention, he is the son of an NFL coaching legend. So buckle up. We're talking faith, freedom, football, and the future of Virginia with the one and only Senator George Allen. I will begin, and it is truly a pleasure to have you here. I'm going to start just by sharing my earliest memory of you. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, and I was sitting in the living room of our home, and my dad and I were watching the NASCAR race at Richmond, and they began interviewing the Virginia governor. And one thing that my dad, who was just completely not political at all, he leans down and taps me on the shoulder and he says, "You see that? He's got a Copenhagen can in his front pocket. I like that guy."
Well, that's true. That's true. I did have a tin of Copenhagen. Those days, they'd actually give U.S. Tobacco would actually have in their sweets Copenhagen and Skoal and all sorts of stuff. And that's great. There's so many people say, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing that." And I said, I always like Mark Twain's saying that nothing needs more reforming than somebody else's habit. And so from my perspective, I've never had a cavity in my life. I attribute it to Copenhagen and maybe Crest from the New Graham Pharmacy in Bluefield. But the thing on chewing tobacco, my father, as you know, I grew up in a football family, not involved in politics. Race and actually, two things come to mind with your story there, Jeremy, is that my father was an assistant coach for the Bears as well as a scout. And he'd bring me to training camp when I was a little pup in grade school, elementary school. And at least the first time I was there, and it was at St. Joseph's College in Rensselaer, Indiana. And it's just cornfields all around there. It was Catholic school. And there's nothing to do there except go swimming in a quarry. And they had a dirt track, short dirt track. And that's the first time I went to any car racing. And the first driver, if any driver, actually flipped all the way over their car, all the way over, not just sideways over, but all the way over, they'd get $5. And that's when I got to liking stock car racing. And the players on the team all chewed tobacco, loose leaf in those days. It'd be beech nut or red man, those sort of things. And as a kid, you like to chew gum. And these players, Doug Atkins in particular, who's a Hall of Famer, went to the University of Tennessee, his big pictures on the side of Neyland Stadium there in Knoxville. He gives me some chewing tobacco after I had gotten it out of his car for his Scout, his International Harvester Scout. And he gave me some, and he says, at first it was sweet, and he said, "Oh, you don't need to spit," and so forth, and just you'll be fine. And then it started burning, and I came as close to throwing up as possible. And I was 8 years old at the time, and I didn't try chewing tobacco again for 5 years. Then I knew what I'm supposed to do with it. But nonetheless, I look at Copenhagen and dip and snuff and all that. It's perfectly fine so long as you're, not spilling your spit cup on someone.
Well, and that's something I would imagine your father would have completely disapproved of. From everything I've read about your father, he kind of lived the straight and narrow, it sounded like.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, Jeremy. My father, he told us kids that he didn't want us to smoke, drink, or cuss. And if you didn't smoke, drink, or cuss by age 21, you'd get $2,000 or a car. That's what cars cost in those days. And so I didn't, it really was a big point of not cursing and cussing. Bill Wade was the quarterback of the Bears in those days and taught me all my quarterback drills at a young age. But Bill Wade would never cuss. He'd say, "Dad gummit," and those sort of things. And he'd sign his signature and put a cross own it. And so Bill Wade, my father would say, now see, Bill Wade never cusses, and, say dad gummit and gosh darn and those sort of things. And I never got caught drinking, and I didn't smoke. Chewing, he didn't say chewing. He
And
didn't say chewing. He did chewing is not smoking. So he preferred that I didn't chew
I picked
tobacco.
up I picked up on some of your political craftsmanship there. You said I never got caught drinking.
Yeah, yeah. Well, my brother Bruce did get caught drinking. He's 4 years younger than me. I remember he was literally commode hugging, upchucking, and my mother's in tears with him as he's throwing up, and he was underage. And she says, "Oh, why are you doing this? Georgie never did this. He never." That I think upset Bruce more than anything else, other than being commode
Yeah,
hugging sick. But
Georgie never did this.
yeah, Georgie never did this. How come you're drinking? Oh gosh, he drank some cheap wine, I guess, or too much
Yeah.
of it, obviously.
Now, you spent time as a buckaroo in northern Nevada, and that was
Yeah.
something I was surprised to learn.
Well, when I was in college, I was starting in college and all. I thought I wanted to be either an architect, a lawyer, or get involved in agriculture and ranching. And I ended up not getting an architecture. It was too much math to it for me. I love design. I still love architecture. And so I did go to law school, and but I wanted to learn about ranching, and I got a job on a ranch near Winnemucca, was the nearest town. It's about 20 miles away in northern Nevada. We had 3,800 head of cattle. They hired me on. The ranch was literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres of BLM, Bureau of Land Management,
Right.
open range, mountains on each side. And I learned a lot. It's one of the most influential jobs I ever had in my life. And it was, you get on, you feed your horse. You had a string of horses you use every day. You'd ride 15 or 20 miles every day from before sunup until you get back, driving the cattle up into the hills where there's better forage and water. In the flats, they had oats and alfalfa. There was a pellet mill, and that was a separate hay crew that was operating all that in the flats. But we had the 3,800 head of cattle to keep alive till the end of the year for the roundup and so forth. And I learned about, I learned how to made my own. They called them chinks. They're like chaps, and learned how to shoe horses. And I learned a lot. I learned about probably 95% of what you need to learn in ranching. I also worked roundups up in Idaho, and branding and castrating and cutting the horns out, polling cattle. And I realized the only way you can make money in agriculture is with volume. You need a lot of land, a lot of cattle, and a lot of money. And I didn't have a lot of money. So I paid more attention than to my legal studies in law school. But it was a great, I could go on for hours with the stories of Winnemucca, Nevada, and the cow boss, who was an old-time cowboy, and the various outlaws that worked on those ranches, and the way of life. The one thing from it is you can get away with anything in Nevada. You're so far away from anyone, so long as you don't get caught, you can get away with a lot. And if it made me determine in my own mind, my own postulates of right and wrong, because you said it yourself, there's no law around. And so I set my own postulates of living, of what I thought was right, what was wrong. And I think that I shouldn't say for me, it was a way for me to set my own standards. Now, those standards of Nevada and the West don't always fit in perfectly with the more genteel, let's say, east of the Blue Ridge planter class views of everything, but it's still part of who I am. It was formative, as was football, as was my family, and all that was something I still think of. I still think of some of the sayings, which I'll not repeat on your on your podcast because you got holy rollers in there. But yeah, so just some of the attitude. I mean, the perspective, the cowboys. He is because I was from Virginia, and he could not believe that there wasn't sagebrush in Virginia. So he thinks the whole world's covered by sagebrush. Right. He considered Kansas the East, and so that was his frame of reference. And so to me, you learned from these folks that had nothing to lose. And in those days, when someone would be run out of town for doing some infraction, getting convicted, they would go to Seattle and hire on to work on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. And it was just a batch of characters, and it's away from everyone else, but still beating those stupid cattle up and down the desert on horseback every day. Oh gosh, I did my first day. I remember we drove the cattle up into the hills where there was water and all, and I was so stinking parched and thirsty. And I asked the cow boss, can we get up there? He wouldn't bring a canteen or any water. He says, you can go all day without drinking water. And I was just parched. And I said, let me get in this pond and get some water. He said, it's too late now. The cattle are all up in it. It's all muddy. And I about passed out looking way back down from the side of the hill to where the ranch was. It was just a little dot kind of reflecting sun off the metal roofs. And I said, oh gosh, I was feeling like I was going to pass out. And he says, well, you want to just sit here and wait? I said, no, I'm going to stay on my horse. It'll follow you down. And I was praying to God that I would survive. And that was my first full day. And I thought, this is just pathetic. You're going to pass out. If I passed out, there's no one, for 30 miles away to even come. And I made it. And those first few weeks, a saddle, get on the saddle in the morning, it's like sitting on a spear. My lips were all chapped and bleeding. I did call home. They had an 8-party line there. I called, and my mother says, come home. You've done enough. And I said, no, I've hired on for this whole summer. I'm going to do it. And made it through. And by the end, I was a decent buckaroo.
That's amazing. So you lived the show Yellowstone, I imagine then.
Yeah, I haven't. Every time I see Yellowstone, I just gosh. I remember when I was governor, they had one of the governor's meetings in Las Vegas, and so I said, well, after this, let's go up and see the ranch I worked on in northern Nevada. And so we get there. It took us a couple of days getting up there with Susan, the kids, and the EPU, the Executive Protection Unit. So we get there, and there's a bunch of cattle dead around. I said, well, they're around, the corrals and all, because they probably got bit by a rattlesnake, or they're trying to doctor them, but they died. And anyway, my wife says, this is just awful. This is so desolate. And all that, and she was thinking it'd be like the Ponderosa,
right.
The Bonanza show. It's nothing like that. And but it's it's not the glamour of it, but it's hard work. You take care of your horse first, then you, and you have a string of horses. You ride a different horse every day, and it's. You're on your own. It's me and the cow boss, the only two people. The only person I talked to the whole time, besides yelping at the cattle, was him. If you're near him, I also whenever I ride a horse, now I never take my hat. If I take my hat off, you keep it close to your chest. There was one time we're coming back, we're still about 5-6 miles away, and took my hat off, relaxed. You're coming in at the end of the day. And the horse started spinning. I lost a foot out of the stirrup and got bucked off, spun off on the ground. The horse just runs off straight to the barns, back to the corrals and all that. And I said, can you catch your horse? He said, no, you're on foot. And so I had to walk for 5 miles back to it. So you learn things the hard way.
One thing that I admire about you is, you are an individual that has been exposed to so many extremes of life. I mean, you're the son of an NFL coach, and then on the flip side of that, you've got this buckaroo time. I imagine all of your life's experiences has given you a sense to just how different the country is.
That's true. That's true. And I tell people travel, listen to people from different perspectives, but there's nothing better than traveling. You can watch TV or watch a movie, or I love maps and all that. But if you actually go somewhere and involved or somehow interact with folks in different areas, you get a different perspective of things. And it was a great experience. And, from football, the thing you learn from football, which is the way I was raised, was, and it's some of the things you learn in life, by the way, Jeremy, you don't realize it until later. Probably the best saying of all, truism, is that I wish I knew then what I know now.
Right.
But the things that formed me, and especially sports and our family and the teams I played on, the players on my father's teams, whether with the Bears or the Rams or the Redskins or the USFL days with the Blitz and Wranglers, is that his teams were always very close, and I'd always be on the sidelines at training camp and all that. Is that the players were from all sorts of different backgrounds, different places, different races, different religions, different ethnicities. None of that mattered. All that mattered was, could you help the team win? Could you block? Could you tackle? Could you punt, kick, pass, whatever it may be, and on a level playing field? And it's a meritocracy,
Right.
where what matters is your performance, not equal results. You have to work hard. You have to be prepared. You have to execute. You don't win all the time. You get knocked down. You get back up. You learn from your mistakes. You don't brood over them. And it's a meritocracy, which I think should be what we aspire to in our society, that equal opportunity for everyone, regardless of their background, to be able to compete and succeed on a level playing field. And the role of the government is not to pick winners or losers, but to allow people to compete and work for their dreams, whatever their enterprise is, whatever their aspiration is. And you don't go to football games to watch the zebras officiate. So you want people to play on a level, free market playing field, so to speak, and free people can decide for themselves what they think is a better product or better service, rather than the government or the referees telling you, limiting your choices. So those are the things that I believed in. And you work hard, hit hard, watch good things happen. Now, sometimes some of those ways are not always perfect for law school. You learn a lot of times that if you really care about your argument that you're making, you need to physically fight rather than debate it. And that did not help me a great deal in law school, getting called to dean's offices and so forth.
Yeah.
And chipping someone's teeth in a fair fight, and they have to pay their dental bill. To me, that's just, you're in a fight, and if you get beat up, you get beat up. You're not going to expect somebody to pay for your dental bill.
I would imagine the world in Nevada versus law school, it's night and day, and
You're right.
maybe
Yeah,
some of the things you learned out west didn't translate very well into the east.
you're exactly correct. You're
Yeah.
exactly correct, Jeremy. You get it. And it's still the only thing I brought to read that whole summer was the Constitution. That was the only thing that I read, was the U.S. Constitution. So that was my reading, my legal reading, which came in handy. And then ultimately, the other job that had a great influence in my life was in law school. After law school, I applied for jobs, believe it or not, in places like Reno and Lexington, Kentucky, and different places. And a friend of mine who was from out west had been a law clerk for a short time for Judge Glenn Williams. He's from Jonesville, Lee County, towards the Cumberland Gap. He was just selected as a federal judge, U.S. District Court judge for the Western District of Virginia, and their main courthouse location was Abingdon. And so he said, you ought to apply for this law clerk position. And the advisors at the University of Virginia were trying to dissuade me. They were very condescending about it all. They said, no, this judge, he lives in Jonesville. That's further west than Detroit, Michigan. It's just out in the middle of nowhere. And, you ought to apply in Atlanta or Charlotte or Richmond or these places. And it's just, and I thought, well, you'd think this is the middle of nowhere. To me, Southwest Virginia is, compared to Northern Nevada, is very settled.
Right.
It's very populated, but it was such a derogatory view of it. And I remember I went down to interview with Judge Williams, and he was having some case in Roanoke, and met with him there. And I didn't think I'd have a chance of getting the job because he had me drive him in my truck. I had a Ford pickup truck. It was a 6-cylinder stick shift in it, and the heat wasn't working in it. And I had gun racks in those days and shotgun shell vests on it, on the rack. The gun wasn't in it, but I had heavy coats and all that in it because the heat wasn't working. This was in the winter. And he swings into it, and the shotgun shells are bothering him in the back. The truck's a mess, just filthy on the outside and inside. And I thought, this is hopeless. There's no way that I'll ever get this job. My father said, yeah, I told you, you got to keep your truck clean, this, that, and the other. And and fortunately, Judge Williams thought it had good character. I told him later when he selected me, said, I thought there's no way I'm going to have a chance to get a job with you. He says, no, it showed character. Then I told him that after his interview, I got an interview with a circuit court judge, Dorch Warner, who's from he's in the circuit court in the Richmond area, and he lived out in the country south of there. So I had my truck. It was all cleaned up and all this for this interview with this judge. And so he says, he looked on my resume, kind of like you, Jeremy, and said, because you got to put, what have you done? What have you done for a living? And I had, working as a buckaroo out west in Nevada and Idaho. And he asked me a question. He says, what do you know about beefalo? And I said, yeah, the carcass of buffalo isn't as good as cattle. And they can graze on less, but you don't have as much meat on the carcass as you do with regular cattle. And the heads are bigger, and it makes it harder sometimes for calf birth. And I said, not much. And I said, but why do you ask me that? And he says, because I have a herd of 60 of them or something like that, of beefalo. And I said, oh. I said, all right, well, so how are they doing? How did they address some of those concerns I just expressed? And he says, oh, they have it figured out. It's, 38% cattle and another all this crossbreeding, and they can forage on less and this, that, and the other. And he's talking about how he thought beefalo were great. And he said, I want you to give me your honest opinion. I want your honest opinion. What do you now think after I've told you this of beefalo? And you can see I'm hesitating. And he says, I want your honest answer. And I said, well, where's the salesman from who told you about this? And he's from the Philadelphia area. I said, I think that salesman is a really great salesman. And he did not offer me the job, but I'm glad, because Judge Williams was just such a great experience. We had the highest caseload of any district court. Cynthia Kinzer was the other law clerk who later, as governor, I appointed to the Supreme Court. It somehow fell to me as governor for a vacancy, and I knew Cynthia Kinzer's philosophy as a law clerk because we talked about cases. And you always worry about putting somebody on a court, and they put on that robe, and all of a sudden they're not who they say they were. And Cynthia ultimately became the first female Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And so Judge Williams, his stories, he was a great storyteller, wise. We had all sorts of strange cases, interesting cases, prisoners cases. Uh, had one where there was a Commonwealth's attorney in Pittsylvania County, which is around Danville, who was taking sexual and monetary bribes to allow prostitution to operate out of a truck stop. In that case, we had to move it out of Danville to Lynchburg. But we would be on the road together talking about his experiences, his perspectives, his wisdom, his great humor. And you get those type of cases and what kind of sentence the guy was ultimately found guilty by the jury, but just the dishonesty, the lack of integrity involved in all of that. So all of those things help form me, because I also, when people ask me when they want to run for office, what are the ingredients? And I say, well, there's no real recipe, but there's nothing more important than integrity.
Right.
Keep your word. Don't make a promise unless you intend to keep that promise. You may not know everything about some subject or issue. Just say, let me study on it, or give me some information, but don't. And my mother, who hated politics, she thought it was so demeaning and all. My father loved it. He loved the competition, but she'd always say, never do anything unethical. She'd send me newspaper articles where politicians are using campaign funds for personal uses and all of that. So to me, there's nothing more important than integrity.
And that's something that it's lacking, of course, on the political sphere, but it feels like as a culture we've drifted from that over the years.
Yeah, yeah. And it's why people so distrust people in government. They say one thing and do another. And I always thought it's so important to keep your word, keep your promises. Don't make a lot of promises. I think the most important thing is for voters to know your philosophy of government, because you're not going to discuss in the midst of a campaign the thousands of issues that
Right.
might could arise. But I'm one who like Jeffersonian principles that so long as you're not harming someone else, leave people alone. I hate limits. I hate restrictions. I detest nanny laws. And Jefferson said the sum of good government is a wise and frugal government that will restrain men from injuring one another, but otherwise leave them free in the pursuit of their industry and improvement, and the government should not take from the mouths of labor the bread they have earned. That's part of his 1801 inaugural address, and I think that's the sum of good government today. And that was my philosophy. Then you
We
have folks like Crockett, who was against the Indian Removal Act, and he's one of my heroes as well. And he stood up for what he believed in, and he ended up losing his election because he went against Andrew Jackson, a fellow Tennessean. And after he lost the second time, he told us, I know this is holy rollers,
No,
but
I was hoping
quote,
I want to hear this quote because I was going to ask you about it, so I'm glad you're going to say it.
okay, get me to say it. And
Yeah.
he says, y'all may go to hell. I'm going to Texas. And
Yeah.
he went to the Alamo, and the Alamo, they lost, but it's one of the most uh, inspirational aspects of history to me. And the lesson from the Alamo, and everyone remembered the Alamo, and Texas got its independence. And it's the point is, it's not how long you live, it's what you do with your time here on earth that matters. And so, granted, Travis and Crockett and others who died at the Alamo could have lived longer. They didn't need to be fighting for independence in Texas. They didn't need to take that stand. But they're remembered and inspire people for centuries after. And so that's the lesson of the Alamo, as well as the Texas independence and people not liking a distant government
Right.
restricting their lives.
And we're about done here, but if you'll permit me, I see some similarities in your life and in Crockett's life as well, where Crockett was elected and then changing demographics ended up costing him the election. And to a large degree, there's a similarity in that and in your election where you ended up losing the Senate seat. Crockett, I think quite possibly his greatest achievement was after he left politics. And what have you been up to after politics?
Well, what I've been after elected office, I still am involved. Susan and I help out candidates. Jason Miaris is one who worked in my 2000 Senate campaign, and so I enjoy helping him a great deal. Ironically, I am now chair of the Reagan Ranch Board of Governors, preserving the Reagan Ranch, his beloved Rancho del Cielo in Santa Barbara County, California, and his boyhood home in Illinois, in Dixon, Illinois. And Reagan's the one who got me involved in politics.
Right.
My father became head coach of the Rams in 1966, and Ronald Reagan was running for governor and came to an LA Rams practice. And I thought, and he was shoulder to shoulder with my father, asking him questions about the drills and so forth. And I said, God, politicians, they normally want 50-yard line seats. And here's one at a practice, a dreary, boring practice, engaged. I said, here's a politician who knows what's important, football.
Right.
And so I followed him. I was in high school then when we moved out there. And I liked what he did. And so we end up in Virginia when my father came to the Redskins. And I was at the University of Virginia, and Ronald Reagan it was late 1975. This is after I'd buckarooed on those ranches in Nevada and all. And he asked me to head up Young Virginians for Reagan. And I said, well, Governor, this is a great honor, but I'm not in the college Republicans. I know nothing about organized politics. I like debating. I like arguing. I like telling people what a great job you did as governor of California and your ideas for the future. And he says, well, just keep doing that. And so I said, all right, I'll do it. And that's how I got involved in organized politics. And a lot of he was running. We were the rebels. We were for Reagan against Gerald Ford, who was the incumbent Republican president. But a lot of those Reagan, long timers, the more seasoned people in politics, took a liking to me and inveigled me or convinced me, persuaded me to run for the House of Delegates in 1979. I lost. I learned a lot from losing. Then I ran again in 1982 and won by a whopping 25 votes after the recount. and the recount, I was remembering Judge Williams' stories about how they'd steal elections with these satchel ballots. They'd all of a sudden come up with a bunch of ballots in a satchel to switch it. And I was thinking that's going to happen to me, but it didn't. I did win, and that's what got me involved. And I'm also helping out Tribal 8As these days. I'm on the board of directors of Armada Hoffler, which is a New York Stock Exchange traded REIT, real estate investment trust. So I pick and choose things that I like to do in business, technology, and help out good candidates. One in your area that I really like, Susan and I have known a long time, is Adam Tolbert, who's running for an open seat in the House of Delegates. And so, we pick and choose, but I stick to those, I call them common sense Jeffersonian conservative principles or Reagan-esque ideas with the Crockett stand of being a free agent and sticking to your principles.
Absolutely. Well, as you look at Virginia today, and this would be my last question, because speaking of integrity, I want to make sure that I don't lose too much. This was going to be a 10-minute interview, and I think we're at the 34-minute mark here.
Okay, so. You get me carried away.
Well, no,
that's slice it.
We can talk all day. I just want to be mindful of your time. But I look at America changing, and more than ever, what state you live in, it feels like it matters. We learned that during COVID, especially. Learned that during COVID, especially. But I see a lot of businesses moving to Texas and the Carolinas. If you were leading Virginia today, what would you say are the biggest opportunities and challenges in our competition with other states?
Great question, Jeremy. And we are in a competition between the states. And you're right. I'll say people are not trees. People and businesses can and do move to places where they can keep more of what they earn or have a better opportunity to be successful and prosperous. And through the years, you see the migration of people. And the COVID with these lockdown states versus the states that were open, it accelerated that exodus of people away from New Jersey and New York and Illinois and California. And out west, they're going to places like Nevada and Arizona and Idaho and Utah. And in the eastern part, and heck, we see it here in Virginia. North Carolina's booming, Tennessee is booming, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Texas, and finally, really, this last year is the first time in about 14 years the population of Virginia is slightly increasing. We're losing population, and you just can't stay still. I had a poster in my office and all my cabinet secretaries' offices of horses, wild horses, galloping across the open range, and it said under it, you either make dust or eat dust. And so you just need to be, well, I thought it's inspirational.
Yeah.
And I wanted us to be leaders. You need to be willing to change, adapt, innovate, and improve. If you stand still, you're falling behind. And so Virginia, several things. The states that are winning have comparatively or competitively lower cost of living and doing business, which means lower taxes, reasonable regulations, a right to work law, affordable energy, and a skilled, capable workforce from which to draw. Virginia's taxes, and the people in Southwest Virginia saw all the differences during COVID, where Tennessee was open, Virginia was shut down. You see how prosperous and growing Tennessee is. Tennessee's got a zero state income tax. Virginia's 5 3/4. What Virginia needs to do, and I think there's some people who get this, is what Virginia needs to do is something similar to what North Carolina has done, and they are ratcheting down their tax rates, and they do it as revenues come in. For example, you have a budget surplus year after year after year here in Virginia, and they're giving rebates, which is fine. It's better than a kick in the butt with a sharp boot to get a rebate. But what they should be doing is structural, long-term changes to ratchet down, lower the income tax rate. And the states that are doing well, and this is evidence, this is facts, the states that have zero state income tax or very low income taxes, but get most of their revenues from higher sales taxes, are the states that are doing better. Because Tennessee's sales taxes are higher than Virginia's. Now, the gasoline prices, and those are gas taxes, are 20 cents a gallon less than they are in Virginia, at least. But I think the way that North Carolina did it, I think to aspire to be what Tennessee is too much. It's great, but I think that's too much.
Baby steps.
That's very good, but there's steps in the right direction. And North Carolina's ratchets down 1/4% or 0.5%, depending on how revenues come in. So you are funding the essential priorities of state government, which in my view are education and law enforcement. And the way you pay for it is with a vibrant, strong economy where people are working and businesses are prospering, and you get more revenues in that way. And so to me, that's where leadership in Virginia can learn from North Carolina. You can learn from Tennessee and Texas and Florida and Nevada and states that have zero state income tax. But I think you also can learn from states like North Carolina that is substantially less than ours, or Arizona out west, where their taxes are about 1/3 of ours. But compared to California's 13.3%, a 2.5% income tax is a big break.
Absolutely.
And so Arizona's doing well. And you see even West Virginia is looking to cut their income taxes. So Virginia needs to get its tax house in order to be more competitive with the Carolinas and Tennessee and states that are south. When they say, oh, our electricity rates are less than the national average, or our taxes are less than the national average. Fine, you're comparing it to all these states that are losing population because of their high cost of living, like New Jersey and Maryland and New York and California. I said, don't compare it. We're not competing with the states to our northeast. We're competing with states to our south. And we have to get much more competitive, especially with North Carolina and Tennessee.
That is a Excellent observation, and I really do appreciate you just taking the time to share that with us. And this has been a real treat for me, and I thank you so much for your time and your stories, but above all that, for your service to our Commonwealth.
No, it was a great honor, and I loved looking out for the folks in Southwest Virginia because it wasn't just a place on the map to me. It was a place in my heart. It's where I got my first professional start, and I genuinely love the people in Southwest Virginia and Upper East Tennessee. They're the best kind of people anywhere. And so it's good to be talking with you, Jeremy, and hope what I said doesn't put too many people to sleep.
If anything, hopefully to wake some folks up and be checking your mail. We'll be sending you some Copenhagen as a thank you.
All right, great. I'll look at the date on it.
All
Long
right.
cut.
Thank
Long
you so
cut.
much.
All right, adios.
Well, folks, that'll do it for this episode of Hay Bellers and Holy Rollers. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Senator George Allen as much as I did. Whether you're baling hay or teaching Sunday school, I think there's a lesson in today's talk about staying rooted in your values, taking pride in your work, and never losing that cowboy spirit no matter where life takes you. If you liked this episode, please be sure to follow, leave us a review, and share it with someone who still believes in hard work, American grit, and the old-fashioned common sense values that made us who we are today. Thanks for riding along with us. Until next time, keep your faith, keep your boots muddy, and keep rolling on.